2024 election, what happens?
There's not a rational person in America who doesn't say, we were so much better off under Trump. Why is Joe Biden receiving six figures from, the entity that's linked to you taking money from communist China?
What do you think happens to Hunter?
They'll probably get away with all of it. You notice the indictment that he was hit with recently, of all the things that he did, amazingly, he cannot pay child support, but he can take out $1.6 million in cash in ATM withdrawals over a 4-year period.
So let's just get right into it real quick. What was it like, and I'm sure you've been asked this 1,000 times, like growing up Trump?
It was interesting. We had it obviously incredibly blessed with so many things. I think we recognized that at an early age, and that's largely because, my mom, and her family sort of came from the opposite of that, right? My mom, and she's born in communist Czechoslovakia, escaped because she was a good athlete, did so legally, but escaped at basically the '76 Olympics because she was a skier. And from a really young age, she made sure we sort of saw the other side of that. I went, with my grandparents. I spoke Czech fluently. I spent my summers in communist Czechoslovakia. I had friends from over there. And so, I had, the juxtaposition of, that with Mar-a-Lago. So you got to see all things. And I think it was really important to, have that understanding. So many people I would have, and even friends of mine and peers in, school growing up in New York City, living in Trump Tower. I think without that balance, things could have gone really far off the rails. But, it was interesting because you like anything else, you sort of get used to it. But I think both of my parents made sure that we sort of had that balance. They always, we had to work summer jobs. That wasn't an option. We had to work for the things that we wanted. So I got Nintendo when all my friends were getting Sega, because by the time I earned it, it wasn't like go clean your room and you get whatever you want. It was, things that took time. You had to actually earn it. So, under some pretty blessed situations that usually go wrong, I think at least for my brother, my sister, and myself, it worked out pretty well considering.
Yeah, no, definitely. And then are you being raised by mom, dad, by nannies?
Yeah, little combination of it all. I mean, I think, I probably give the most credit to sort of my grandparents on my mother's side, the ones, from communist Czechoslovakia. They were here, half the year, and I spent my summers over there. And, that was a big part of it. We had some just incredible people throughout our lives, sort of like with business or anything else. People you almost look at as like mentors. Like there are a couple of guys, some guys that were security guards that just were like, okay, Don, like we're going to take you shooting every weekend. And we just would do that. And, guys that opened up doors that I may not have otherwise been exposed to. So, I guess as the saying goes, it takes a village. And there were a lot of people sort of in that process.
What was the order of born? Were you the firstborn?
I'm the oldest, yeah.
So it's you, Eric?
Me, Ivanka, Eric.
Okay, so now Ivanka, dude, she's gorgeous. I mean, compared to any guy in the family, she's much more beautiful than you guys are. So, did that rob?
How dare you say that in 2023, Grant? I think,
I
too can be female beauty pageant contestant winner and stuff like that. But no, she's great.
Yeah. So did she rob some of your thunder? I mean, firstborn, your dad had to be so proud. Does that rob a little bit of your thunder because it's the first girl? I got 2 girls, so I don't know what it's like.
Yeah. Well, listen, it's sort of interesting. You see it with the girls. They just, I look at my girls compared to my boys. I got 5 kids, and I also know how that happens now. So I got new hobbies. But the girls just also mature so much faster. You know what I mean? I look at my daughter, my 9-year-old is the way she just conducts herself, and versus my boys in early teens and or just preteens, it's just so different. Ivanka was definitely as the girl, and especially with the Trumps, I mean, definitely very much loved by my dad, but she also kicked ass in everything that she did. Started off at a very young age, and just sort of did a great job with all of that. So I think we all came into our own very differently and at different ages.
Yeah, what's your earliest memory from that whole scene? Like, if you had one early memory from being a Trump.
We had some interesting memories. I mean, playing Nintendo with like Michael Jackson.
Wow.
Like back when he was, Beyonce, Jay-Z, all the biggest people, combined as one individual, right? There was probably no one bigger at any moment in time, than peak Michael. And I mean, I used to sit there and play video games with him as a kid.
Unbelievable.
So there were things that you realize, this is not the norm. This is not necessarily normal. And yet, I guess for us, some of that was normal.
Yeah. So was the family always around celebrities? I mean, you were basically raised.
I mean, certainly my parents were. I think, for me, it was never really my thing, right? It was always I sort of avoided that. I went to boarding school at a pretty young age when I was like, in 8th grade in central Pennsylvania. I was always sort of into the outdoor stuff. So, my friends tended to sort of gravitate from, far more normal places than celebrity. And I wasn't, even living in New York in my, 20s and stuff like that and starting to work. I was never that guy on like let's call it, I don't know, the New York City, like rubber chicken dinner charity circuit thing. Like, I picked one, took ownership of it, worked really hard, but it wasn't about checking all the boxes off to be at all the things to be seen. I actually probably, avoided most of that throughout most of my life until, I sort of figured out, I guess it was really with The Apprentice, until I sort of figured out like, hey, wait a second, like you can actually parlay, some of that celebrity or, let's call it followers on social media and all into business, right? Like I am actually not, exercising my fullest potential if I don't take advantage of that as a business guy. Or, so those things sort of changed. So I went from probably, avoiding those things and the celebrity and that stuff at all costs to, embracing it enough that you parlay it into a competitive advantage.
Yeah.
Not so much that it becomes all encompassing in your life, but trying to find that happy medium there, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. So you're saying it was The Apprentice that kind of, how old were you when this hit you?
I mean, this probably like, I guess, late 20s, early 30s. And it was like, okay, wait a second. So, I got this last name. I'm not going to be able to avoid that.
Right, right.
If I can turn that into XYZ as opposed to just X, because I'm not taking advantage of it. I mean, that's sort of foolish, but you also see people go off the deep end with that stuff when it's just, that becomes all about that. And there's nothing really that, so, I guess I was blessed to sort of, at least in my mind, maintain sort of enough of that, the roots my grandparents instilled in me, keep enough of that and sort of escape the insanity on the weekends and spend my time in the woods and on streams, fishing and hunting, and, maintained and, if anything more so, just kept sort of my normal friends from normal walks of life that weren't necessarily part of that group. But, hey, if I could, promote a building or whatever we were selling a little bit more by being out there, again, like you got to take advantage of the things that you're given.
Yeah, and this is just for the viewers and listeners. By the way, we got X on here right now, so this is pre-social media. Social media has not exploded. TV is still in its heyday. Apprentice is rocking 13, 14 seasons or something.
Yeah.
And so you're seeing for the first time that's interesting to hear that you could actually leverage celebrity without going off the deep end. The thing I admire about you and your brother and your sisters is that, like, you guys have not got lost in the life of celebrity that I've seen a lot of people do. Do you think the hunting and the fishing, and I know your communist upbringing or the influence your grandparents have with communism, do you think that that's what's kept you grounded?
I really think so. I mean, it was those times, I got into sort of the outdoor stuff that I'm into, I'm not saying I was an angel, you know what I mean? I'm not saying in my 20s I was, I've had my moments for sure. I mean, I wasn't Hunter Biden, but I wasn't an angel. But I think, the outdoor stuff, waking up at 4 o'clock in the morning to be in a duck blind or a deer stand or something like that, it sort of, it kept a level of normalcy. I think I escaped New York City so much, because of that. I guess, my real first sort of real estate purchase was like, just little piece of land in, basically upstate New York in the Catskills on a river because I wanted to go fishing. And I really liked that. And, it pulled you out of that world. And again, I'm not saying I didn't enjoy some of that in my early 20s when I was wilder and doing it, but I was lucky to be able to sort of straddle that bridge, have sort of one foot in each pond and not just sort of be fully committed to one because, I think at least in terms of the New York stuff, that could have gone really wrong really fast as it has for a lot of people.
So you brought up your 20s. What's the craziest thing you did in your 20s?
Okay. Statute of limitations isn't likely yet expired, Grant. So,
okay.
No, listen,
My early 20s was awful. So,
yeah, no, I definitely did some dumbass stuff. And by the way, I think, I don't want or I wouldn't trust anyone who hasn't done those things. I see that a lot, in politics today. You have so many people that, so puritanical, right? It's like, well, do you know anything about life? Like, have you experienced anything beyond sort of just, some sort of cookie cutter thing that this is what you're supposed to have done? So I think you actually need, some of that in life to actually have a more complete understanding of it, how it all comes together.
When did you start working with Trump, with the organization?
Yeah, so I graduated from Wharton spring of 2000. And called my father and said, "Hey, I'm moving to Colorado to be a bartender and a fly fishing guide," and moved out west for about 2 years. I guess just wanted to get some stuff out of my system again. Good times, but also, when it's sort of, hey, you're going into a family business, is it really what you want? Like I sort of loved it. You grow up in some of it, but it is very hard, and we can talk about this later as well, because I did sort of remake myself perhaps a little bit later on in life as well. But it's sort of hard to wake up at 35 for a lot of people and be like, "Oh crap, I'm totally trapped in something I didn't want to do." Now you got a job and a mortgage and kids, and I see so many people that are miserable and trapped in that. So I guess for me then I was like, "Hey, I don't have any of those things. I just graduated from a great business school, but is it what I wanted to do?" So, called my father. Was like, "Hey, I'm moving out to Colorado. Got a job in a bar." This was an amazing conversation, by the way. This would have been you can only imagine how that went. It was like, what do you mean you're going to Colorado to work at a bar? I don't understand. It's like you're supposed to be in real. And I took that time off.
So his expectation was you were going to come work in the business.
Yeah, right away, and that's what you did. And for me, it was different. I started working at a bar. Had a night job, so I could do all the stuff I loved doing the day, whether it was skiing, fishing, hunting. I had friends over there. We traveled all over the world. I mean, we went to Africa, spent 8 weeks living out of the back of a truck, all over Zimbabwe and South Africa, and all that stuff. Hunting and just this wasn't like a, let's call it Hemingway style, catered safari. I mean, we were bribing our way across borders. It was pretty amazing, probably stupid, but one of those times, I guess, that you could still get away with that, or maybe after being held at gunpoint a few times, I guess everything gets normalized. So did that and realized that it was awesome, but it also wasn't the most fulfilling thing after a while. So it was then going back, entering the business, and I guess it was right after 9/11. 9/11 sort of happened and everything sort of accelerated. It was like, hey, I was going to go back eventually, but that was like one of those things. Like I found out about 9/11 coming out of, I was bow hunting elk, just coming out of the woods. I get back to my truck that morning, and I'm like, wait, what? Like I literally thought it was from the first radio reports. This was radio. This is not even sure I had a cell phone yet. And you're listening, it's like I thought some idiot flew a Cessna, into the World Trade Center, and then you start realizing it's so much more. And then just because of where I did go to school, graduating Wharton, all my friends were down on Wall Street, everyone I knew, family, it was just like, okay, time to go home. And I was basically packed up my car and was driving home 2-3 days later.
So 9/11, 2001, you're in Colorado elk hunting that morning.
Yeah, that morning, and 3 days later, I was back in the city starting work, something like that.
And so, what time do you get done elk hunting on a given day?
I get, just sort of depends on what's happening, right? If you're into them, you could be out there all day. If you're not, you say, hey, I'm going to go in and get an early breakfast, right? So I think just hunting public land elk, so it was kind of low odds. End up pulling it off with a couple of buddies of mine, but we were, I think I up until that point, it'd been like 28 days straight that I was hunting.
Wow.
Early in the mornings and then, working late at night. So, but, at I guess 22,
Yeah,
you can pull that off a little. Yeah.
yeah, and the trade centers get hit about 9 o'clock in the morning, I think. So
Yeah.
when did you find out? Was it noon? Was it 11?
It was, well, don't forget, and I'm, Colorado, right? So I'm
Oh,
mountain time. So I'm 2 hours back. So,
right, right.
you know, I don't remember it exactly. And I just,
Yeah.
remembered, from there going to my friend's place and just watching what was unfolding on TV for the rest of the day and just like
Crazy.
trying to figure it all out. But yeah, no, it had definitely happened. But, just even from the initial reports, just on the radio, it was probably fairly early, or I was just, I guess people still didn't know exactly what was going on for a little while. But that changed the game. And all of a sudden, I was like, okay, I'm back in New York.
Yeah. Did you call home? Did you call dad and say, hey, what the hell's happening?
Oh yeah, no, of course. I mean, well, first of all, I was just scrambling to, again, this is 2001, and so
Yeah.
not everyone even had a cell phone in their
Wow.
pocket, right? I'm sure, my dad had probably, the big brick Motorola or whatever at that time, or maybe we'd just gone into the flip phones, but like, it wasn't one. Even if you had one, right? It was sort of like, no, that was a car phone. Like you use it in your car, but like you didn't think to put it in your pocket. Even. I mean, it's sort of amazing how much that has changed. Whereas
Right.
now I can do 99% of what I need to do on any given day, pretty much from my pocket. You have access to the Library of Congress in your pocket. That was unheard of at the time.
It's crazy, man. So you go back to New York. You're like, okay, Dad, I'm ready to throw in here.
Yeah.
What is that? What do you negotiate a deal? You negotiate a salary?
No, started a lot lower down. Summer jobs and stuff like that. Before that was, I guess, I started probably 12 or 13 summer jobs. I'd work in Atlantic City, where we had casinos, and I'd work in the marina as a dock attendant, for
Dude,
tips
awesome.
and minimum wage. Did that for a couple of years. Then it was like working landscaping at one of the places we're doing stuff to try to create a golf course. So I was joking. I'm probably the only like son of a billionaire that can drive like a D10 Caterpillar because I actually operated machinery. We were doing these things. I was running chainsaws, and we actually did those things. My father's theory on that was, hey, if you're gonna build a wall, no pun intended, or if you're gonna build a building and a foundation, like you better know how to actually do it, not theoretically do it from an office window. And so, starting young, he made sure we worked pretty, labor intensive type jobs. I think one of the greatest things ever for me was honestly working sort of minimum wage jobs for tips. You understand service.
Yep.
That came in really handy later on, just working in sort of the hotel industry and just understanding that difference. Again, there's such a difference between theory and practice. So it was funny, worked a couple of years at the marina, but it's out beautiful. You're in the sun all summer. You're tying up boats. There's, chicks around, like whatever. So even if you're a young kid working the job, it's still sort of exciting. And, guys are, showing off. And so they're tipping you $20 for, a couple seconds of work. And like, that was awesome. You go from there to going, literally running, tractors and caterpillars and bulldozers and chainsaws. And I remember that transition because it was like the first job I was making minimum wage, but like my actual income was significantly higher because, the tip side of it, right? So I go and I'm working a minimum wage job now that's much more labor intensive, much more dangerous, much more aggressive. And, no one's tipping you on a construction site.
Right,
That's not
right.
how it works, right? And so I remember going like sort of 3/4 of the way through the summer, I go to my dad, I'm like, wait a second, like I'm breaking my ass here. And I'm making much less than I ever made. It's much more grueling. And like, why didn't you give me a raise? He was like, well, why would I pay you more than you were willing to work for? And it was just like, boom, light bulb went off in my head. And I was like, oh my God, like literally every aspect of life is just, you got to ask. You can't be afraid. Like, the word no shouldn't even be a consideration in your vocabulary. You just got to go after the things that you want. They're not going to just present them to you. And I understand that I'm not pretending for 1 second that I haven't been, incredibly blessed.
Yeah.
But those are the sorts of ways he taught you the hard way. I tried negotiating retroactive for the raise, that failed miserably. But the lesson stuck, and the lesson was really important.
So for Sabrina, you met Sabrina at your house. Okay.
Yeah.
She's the one that arranged this interview, and I appreciate that. Would you tell her, keep me, that I'm here too as well, and she's listening. Would you tell her in retrospect, looking backward, would you have gone and done the Colorado gig, or take it and say, hey, I'm going to go help build this empire out? at 20
Now,
years
listen,
old?
the Colorado gig was definitely it was definitely a big thing, right? So you're in your early 20s, you're working in a business, even a family business, but guess what? You're closing a big deal. You're closing a huge construction loan on a $1 billion project. It's like, you got to be there. You're there till 2 in the morning. You're there till 3 in the morning. You're there sometimes, throughout the night. You do that. You cancel vacations because they're coming up, right? Well, no, this is going to happen this week, and then nothing happens. I'm sure you've been there a lot, right? The lawyer screws something up. You cancel. You're in vacation. You lose all of that. You're not going on, and then nothing even happens.
Right.
Having had that time before you were locked into sort of those responsibilities, made you realize you actually wanted to be there for certain, right? Because you're young. You don't know, dude. Things change so much in your 20s and 30s. It's really hard. For many people, I don't know that anyone's locked in at their early 20s. I saw that, having gone to like Wharton undergrad. I mean, you got kids that are 14 years old, like, I want to be an investment banker. I'm like, but do you really?
Right.
That was the big thing. Well, it's not. No. They just wanted to make a lot of money.
Yeah.
They didn't really want to be investment bankers. The guys that actually did end up being really successful. The guys that didn't did like, the 2-year
They blew
sort
out.
of hell years
Yeah.
Of investment banking, and they're like, shit, I'm not making the money. Well, they were not making the money because they weren't putting in the extra time. They weren't canceling their vacations. They weren't doing those things, but they didn't know any better, so they waste a lot of time. And then, when they finally, if they ever did figure it out, they'd quit and do something totally different. But now you're starting again in your 30s. You have to build it up. So I think, having that understanding of like, I tried something different, totally different. It was awesome, but it's not what I want to do every day. It's what I want to do in my free time or my vacations, but not every day. You start taking the things that you love for granted, and they become a little bit too easy. For me, that was really important.
I'm sure you have, but like for me at least, looking into your life and hearing everything, and your dad's always this glow of all this attention, good, bad, indifferent, whatever. I don't hear the story about you guys, right? Like hearing your struggle in your 20s, it's really very refreshing. I think a lot of people that are going to listen to this are going to be like, oh, wow. Like nobody was handing you money. Were you given an allowance as a kid?
Yeah, like in college, I got like $300 a month, and anything else I wanted to,
you had
work,
to earn.
I had to work for during the summer. So
Yeah.
like I was still the guy bumming beer money. And again, this is not like
you're not bitching.
I get that I'm blessed. Like, you know what I mean?
No, I get it.
When I moved to Colorado, like, I always tell the story. Like, I moved to Colorado, and like there was like, okay, you're moving to Colorado. Like, well, you're cut off. Like, and I guess, I had two things that they sort of forgot. Like, I had my car. And I had a gas card that they forgot to cancel. So like, I joke that I sort of spent a year and a half like living proverbial off the gas station sushi, because that was, a pretty significant income boost to whatever I was making in a bar.
So your dad cut you off when you said, I'm going to Colorado.
Oh yeah, no, listen,
That's awesome,
you want to
dude.
be that? That's fine, 100%.
Yeah.
But my parents always were good with that. And again, I don't want to belabor the caveat of like, I get that we were blessed, but we were spoiled the right way. Like my mom, was sort of, very European woman. We traveled all over the world with her. We saw incredible things. We experienced awesome stuff. We were around really interesting people a lot of the times, at least with them. But they never did hey, here's whatever money you want, just stay out of our hair. They didn't sort of buy peace and quiet by just giving us unlimited stuff. So like I said earlier, I got Nintendo when all my friends were getting Sega, a year late, because like I had to earn to what we were there. By the time I got what I had sort of been earning for, it was almost like no longer relevant.
Yeah.
And I think that was really important. And something that they did a really good job of, whether, sort of by default or, perhaps on purpose. I don't even know. But, we were spoiled the right way, is the way I sort of like to say it. Stuff that you could never go back and experience, and, seeing the world and, that kind of stuff was incredible. But it wasn't, here, you're 12 years old, here's 10 grand, go do whatever the hell you want. It was just very different.
Yeah. I mean, even the people that hate Trump, right? When you bring up the four of you guys, like as kids, you guys get him a lot of coverage, man. I can't tell you how many conversations I've been in where like, but the kids. I mean, he didn't.
I appreciate. There's a lot of people that hate me too, but that's okay.
Yeah, but that's a new thing. That's a new
I gave
thing.
up trying to be friends with everyone a long time ago. That was another interesting sort of, business lesson with politics, right? It was, hey, you're in hotels, right? You're trying to please everyone, right? You don't want to but a lot of what I'm doing now, it's sort of like, hey, guess what? Like, it's okay. Like, I can have some conviction. I can do this, and like, there's a great business to be had being loved by, half a country and actually fighting for it, then sort of being agnostic to everyone or indifferent to everyone. And so, it's sort of interesting how so much of that changes, and the way you look at the world actually changes, as you mature, as circumstances present themselves.
So let's just talk about the family and the politics thing, because the thing that Elaine and I, and we're big fans, dude. Like, I voted for your dad. I always vote for him. I'm a huge supporter of the whole thing, because of just like, I'm 65 years old. I have not wanted politicians since John Kennedy died.
Yeah.
I'm like, I want somebody that tells the truth. Now, I think most of the country has prayed and wanted for that and said that privately. And then when they got it, they're like, no, I don't want it if that's what it means.
But I think the whole point, if that's what it means, was also a created thing, right? Like, how many things, like, I don't want Trump if he's working for Russia. Well, that's all a lie. Well, I don't like his attitude.
No, I don't mean that.
His attitude would be different if you weren't lying up. Meaning, if you weren't trying to jail him or saying he's you're trying to jail his children. So, it feels like so much of the hate actually for him was literally based on circumstance entirely created. By the media, by the left, by big tech, et cetera.
Yeah, but what I'm saying, even before the Russia, right? I'm talking about, like, friends of mine are like, dude, I wish he said it different. I'm like, if he said it different, he wouldn't get in there in the first place.
Correct.
But so, and I don't think, my wife always accuses me of saying everything the wrong way. You step on yourself, you say it the wrong way, you offend people. I'm like, okay. So when some of that does happen, though, okay, the thing I'm most curious about is when you guys even think, hey, he went too far. Like, how do y'all handle him, or how do y'all handle that internally, or do you?
There's sort of not a lot of handling that way. It's funny because it's a totally rational question, right? And it's one of those, people did that all the time. Like, so, how long, did you guys get together and discuss? How many months did you discuss that he's going to run for president? And it was like, oh, dude, I don't know. Like, about 20 minutes before he went down the escalator, I was like 50-50 if this thing actually happens. Let's see. But, he's just that way, right? He has an instinct and he goes for it. He's going to do what he wants. So, it's sort of very different. I think for us growing up, you had sort of our mother, very involved day to day. It's sort of, whether, even if we had sitters or boarding schools or whatever it is that we did, but she was sort of, management. Once we graduated college and starting, entering the workforce, that's sort of when he took over. That's, he understands what he's good at, what he's not. He's not going to be the guy, doing diapers, and, it just wasn't his thing. Never would have been, and he would have been miserable with it. So they each sort of had distinct roles as we got older, and he took over a lot more. Once we were more adult and he could relate, and so he was always good about actually spending time with us, but it was sort of on his terms. It's like, well, okay, well, come with me this weekend, but that means we're going to be walking, a construction site for 11 hours, and that's pretty exciting. But when you're 6. It can get old a little quick too, right?
Right. So it's roll with me or don't roll with me.
Yeah.
Now, so when he goes too far, I mean, have you ever seen him go too far?
No, Grant, I've never actually seen that. As the person who used to get called at like 5 a.m., this is 2015, you get 5 a.m. Hey, you're going to be on in CNN in 1 hour. Congratulations. I was like, what happened now? Like,
Yeah.
So it was always funny. Like, hey, Don, did you ever think maybe like to tell your dad like not to tweet some of that? Like no, I never thought about that.
Yeah.
I'm the guy that gets called at 4 a.m., 5 a.m., whatever it is, 3 times a week to deal with it. But I never thought about that. So of course you do. But like, I also understand, sort of, I just understand the way he thinks, and it's different. It's allowed him to be successful across, so many spectrums, right? I mean, whether it wasn't just real estate, but then taking things to a different level within real estate. Then you get into TV, which is a brutal and a cutthroat world, and gets to the highest level of that. Then, hey, you know what? Let's take a shot at politics. And it's not like, hey, I won a seat for dog catcher, or city council. It's like, no. But like, we're just going to start right with the president of the United States and win. So I just understand it. It makes sense to me, and doesn't mean I'm always thrilled with every one of the things. And there's plenty of times I disagree. But I get what he's doing, and I have a lot of respect for his ability to see that and that instinct. And so, I may not always even agree with it at the time, but then 6 months later, you're like, you know what, man, he nailed it. He was actually right. But,
right.
So it's interesting.
Now, Don, when you go too far, has he ever slammed down on you?
Oh, dude, it's so funny.
Give me one.
The calls, I used to get this a lot, and like the irony of all ironies was, and Kimberly was there for a couple of these, I'd get a call like, Mr. Trump Jr., this is the White House operator. This is when he was president, right? And like, what do I do now? I was like on a first name basis with these guys, and well, I don't know, sir, but the president would like to speak to you. And he'd get on the phone like, hey, Don, you're too aggressive on social media. I'm like, wait, what? I'm like, just wait, say it again, please, because I was like, Dad, I love you. I respect and I'm fairly differential to a lot of things. I mean, if you're gonna, sit me down and talk about business and like looking at things in a certain way in life, I am more than happy to have that conversation. But if you're going to talk about being a little too aggressive on social media, I believe you may have ceded the moral high ground on this one. And it was like that 1980s like drug commercial. It's like, I learned it by watching you, Dad. So no, there's definitely times, but it was usually about me being too aggressive on social media, which I just always found hilarious.
So that brings me to the Skittles comment. Okay.
Yeah.
By the way, you were right on Skittles.
Of course I was right. Like it doesn't,
Skittles
that was a Skittles.
Have been banned.
It was about refugees, and I know that's a terrible thing. You're not allowed to be critical of this, but it was a picture of like, 10,000 Skittles in a bowl and say, hey, if one of these things was laced with cyanide, like, would you still eat from the bowl? And he's racist. I'm like, it's not racist. It's called probability and statistics. You know what I mean? It has nothing to do with like, are we going to do that? We're going through a time where we're letting in, continue to do so, unvetted, unfettered amounts of people into our country, and like eventually something's going to go wrong, and we're going to see that. And so it was more of a commentary on probability, math, statistics, and the reality is you would never take one of those Skittles as a chance. But they try to turn everything into everything. Racism is the easy button of the political left, right? Something that could be about math, that's racist. You see the reverse racism in DEI. I mean, perhaps no better week than what we're seeing happening at Harvard this week, right? You have the head of Harvard.
When you say DEI, Don, just for everybody, DEI, you refer to what?
The diversity, equity, and inclusion. The pillar of today's left.
Yeah.
So you don't have to be qualified, but if you check a couple other boxes in whatever happens to be sort of the woke favorite category of the week, then it doesn't really matter. So the president of Harvard this week was caught, I believe, in 5 separate plagiarism scandals.
Yeah.
Those would have clearly violated the standards of Harvard. She's the president of the university. Not particularly, as an academic, not someone who's written a lot of papers, but I believe she's done 11 academic papers. 5 of them were, clearly plagiarized and, has been caught, but nothing's going to happen. This follows after a few weeks of turning a blind eye to rabid hate and anti-Semitism against, Jews on Harvard's campus. So this happened at Penn, my alma mater. That lady, the president there, did the same thing and was removed. But, she was white, and it's a little bit different, I guess. And, so you see this sort of the irony of all these things going on right now. Do as I say, not as I do. But, the whole race issue has just become the easy button of the political left. If you don't like it, you're racist, you're misogynist, you're this. And at this point, I think so many people, at least for a while, they were so afraid of it. But now it's like, it's all you got. Like, oh, you're calling me a racist? Like, roll eyes, move on, because it doesn't mean anything anymore, which does a major disservice to the people who are actually still affected by racism. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I'm just saying it's not the cause of and solution for all of life's problems like the left has turned it into.
So when you're called a racist, what is your response?
It's like, show me, prove it. Like, you may not like what I'm saying, but if it's, math is racist. Grant, we heard that because, people are underperforming. We're going to get rid of, AP classes in high schools because, certain demographics may not perform as well, and we don't want them to feel bad about ourselves. So rather than actually, enabling, gifted kids to excel, it doesn't matter, if they're purple, blue, or green. We're gonna eliminate those programs to make sure we're catering to the lowest common denominator. It's just not a recipe for success.
When Ukraine went off, and when I think Putin had tanks there for months, and I don't know, I'm asking,
the entity that's linked to you taking money from communist China that the banks have.
Your dad being there, when those tanks lined up there for whatever 3 weeks or whatever the time was, how, like, Biden has to know it, and it is unimaginable to me that Putin did not have authority from Joe Biden to do his thing.
Well, what I think Joe Biden did, and the Democrats, and really the sort of DC war machine, is they gave Putin every excuse that he needed to invade. Don't forget, the red line, proverbial red line for Putin was always, hey, Ukraine is this like 1,000-mile long, very large country by landmass buffer zone between NATO and Russia's border. And that was always sort of like, hey, don't do it. We're happy with the buffer zone. Half of Ukraine is sort of ethnically Russian anyway. This has worked for 60 years. Don't do it. And, Joe Biden and the Democrats and the war machine, no, we're going to bring them into NATO. We're like, so you're going to move NATO's borders closer to them. Like, that was, to me, and again, I'm not saying Putin's a good guy. This is not me being an apologist for him. Right. But like, you gave him, maybe he was going to do it anyway, just like China's going to eventually going into Taiwan, but we've just made it easier by exuding weakness, by exuding incompetence, by depleting, our military stockpile fighting other people's wars. And so, maybe he would have done it anyway, but we literally were like basically taunting him. And again, understanding sort of the Eastern European mentality, it's a little different, right? It's not like the US today. Like, there's a sort of a macho culture there. And if you're going to taunt the guy on a world stage, that's also problematic. So we did all of this, and it's like, oh my God, I can't believe he did this. Like, well, he gave you a pretty clear red line. You brought in this country who's not a member of NATO, never has been. You gave him every excuse that he needed to do it. And now, to your point, maybe, a little bit, or at least perhaps where you were, alluding to, is like, well, now it seems like there's this incredible appetite for war. I mean, I know we got out of Afghanistan like 18 months ago, so the war machine's chomping at the bit, and, our generals only, their retirement plan isn't to go, buy real estate and do this. It's to get on the board of Raytheon and Lockheed Martin and sell more missiles. The only way you do that is, by being in yet another never-ending war. But I mean, we're doing it again. I mean, I think Joe Biden did it yesterday. Like, well, we're going to talk about make sure that, Ukraine gets into NATO now. I'm like, wait, so we're then going to commit our troops because they're already in a war, so we let them in? Like, they're like begging for a ground war in Europe. I'm like, I don't even understand.
Yeah.
I don't even, it makes no sense whatsoever until you understand that there's no money in peace. There's only money in war.
Yeah.
And when you realize that DC doesn't create anything, they don't build anything, they peddle influence, and negotiate these war contracts and who's getting what missiles, you realize how out of sync they are. I've done this a lot. Like you, I speak a lot publicly to, pretty big crowds. I have done this.
What's the biggest crowd you've done?
Well, I mean, I've done the RNC, 25, 30,000, for me, listen, I got a little bit of the Trump gene, right? For me, it's actually easier to speak to a bigger crowd, right?
Yeah.
The bigger the crowd, the better. The energy you get from that, it just makes it easier for me.
Yeah,
for whatever reason, I'm the opposite of a lot of people where, they panic in front of 10 people. In front of 10 people, I'm not panicked. I'm just bored.
Yeah.
So the bigger, the better. But over the last year, I've done this now probably in front of 30, 35,000 people total, right? 10, 15 events. Some, big rallies from my father, 15, 17,000 people, some 5, 600 to 2,500 people in a room. Hey, is Ukraine a top 1, top 2, top 5, top 10 issue for any of the people in the room? 30,000 people total over the last year. One person raised his hand once that it was a top 10 issue, not even a top 5. So I was like, okay, so it's a top 10. Why? He's like, well, I'm from Ukraine. I was like, okay, that I understand. But if you ask Mitch McConnell and the Republican leadership, it is the #1 issue for Republicans across America. I'm like, I've been in front of more Republicans across America than Mitch McConnell has been in his lifetime. If those guys can put 5, 10 people in a room, they're blessed. It's different from me or my father or for the places that I speak at or if I open up for my father. So I'm seeing tens of thousands of Americans on a monthly basis, and it's not a top 10 issue for them. So there's a disalignment between the people that we've chosen or have put in there to represent us and the people who are supposed to be represented. And there's no consequence for that. And so, I'm hoping that Americans are starting to finally figure that out, because there's not a Republican I've spoken to in a year that thinks it's even remotely an issue. And yet we've spent $130 billion. We have no interest in fixing our border. We could have done that for $3 billion. But we will spend, 100x, in Ukraine. They want to spend another 60. They haven't articulated what our goals are or what that actually gets us. If 130 didn't get us anything, what's the next 60?
Yeah, I mean, right? People act like
Ukraine's not winning this thing. We hear, oh, Ukraine took out a Russian tank today. That's wonderful. Meanwhile, Russia takes over another city, and it's like, well, it was a strategic withdrawal by Ukraine. It's like, no, it's not. They're losing. And all you're doing is peddling money and influence while the people that, Zelensky and others view as the peasants get to go be sent to the front lines to die as cannon fodder. Like, I don't even hey, I'm fine with money to something if you can articulate the goal, but they're not even doing that.
Yeah. So what do you think?
I've been very vocal about it, and it's pretty disgusting what's going on.
What would you suggest we do there?
Well, the second you cut off the money, guess what? People get to the table.
Right.
Okay. It's no different than a real estate deal.
That's right.
When you're talking about it, we have a lot of leverage. We can drive them to the table, because it'd be like, hey, if the bank's foreclosing, guess what? You're talking to the bank. You may not love the bank. It may not be ideal, but you're talking. You're not just walking away, right? You're going to have that conversation. And as long as the money is endless, the amount of, we don't have audits. We don't know where it's being spent. We have no idea. And we couldn't care less. The Pentagon, what was it? They lost, another 220 billion, lost it, right? I'm sure that's part of the slush fund for that one, but just lost. And hey, they want to audit your Venmo account if you spend more than $600, and if you can't account for it, you're going to jail for tax fraud. But they can lose $220 billion. I think the Pentagon lost what, another couple trillion, I think, just misplaced. Well, we can't find it, Grant. Like, can't find a couple $trillion. Like, I don't understand.
I want to make sure the audience understands what you just said, and I know your team's telling me you're down to 5 minutes or something, I
apologize, but yeah.
No, we'll do it again, but because I got a whole bunch of stuff I'm interested in, like parallel economy, building your own, Biden economic failures. But you're saying in a real estate deal, as long as you keep funding that bank, let's say a deal's in trouble, they're not going to negotiate with you if you keep funding the interest.
I guess either way, right? If you're in trouble and you're not paying the bank, guess what? They're getting you to come to the table to figure it out. Right. It works both ways. But if there's an endless supply of capital, like, there's no incentive for anyone to do it right. There's no incentive to do it efficiently. By the way, a lot could be said about this stuff before sort of 2008, where it's just like, everyone's dentist was a developer and everyone's a developer because it's so easy when there's free money and everything's stupid and no one really cares. It's when things go wrong, but you hear about the graft, that it's there, it's going on, you hear that we're unable to account for any of it, and we're not even trying, and you just know what's going on. So I think for me, the last few years have been so enlightening, because, you're told, like, no, America is this, the shining beacon on a hill, and everything's so great. Like, you realize, like, dude, they're all sound bites for these guys. Like, it doesn't actually mean anything. The Democrats, they're all about democracy and transparency, and yet they're trying to jail their political opponents, and they're trying to make sure that they're colluding with big tech to censor any view that is other than their own. And I'm like, it doesn't seem like they're all for democracy within our republic. It seems like no, it's just a BS soundbite that they can say. They scream it, but they're not actually preaching it, or they're not actually practicing it in real life. And so I think the underbelly of what's going on in the weather, Trump derangement syndrome, the insanity to the response to anything, if Trump said Merry Christmas, it was like, oh my God, this is worse than Watergate. And yet you have, Joe Biden and his son taking billions from China for no conceivable real purpose other than obviously influence peddling. And we don't want to look into that. It's like, wait a minute, I did like 40 plus hours of congressional testimony for treason on the Russia hoax. We now know that's a lie. There's no accountability for that. But like, no, we're not going to bring. Hunter Biden doesn't need to go speak in. We'll do it publicly, which is a farce, by the way, because they don't get into the details, right? The lawyers aren't asking the questions. It's a 5-minute on and off. It's not transparency. It's exactly the opposite. But the media will sell you this. Like, if the shoes were reversed, if I was taking money from China and I'm sending checks to my dad and I'm doing, like, I have a feeling they'd want to know.
You'd be under.
But now they're indifferent.
Yeah. What do you think?
It's amazing stuff.
Yeah. What do you think happens to Hunter?
Well, listen, I think they'll do whatever they can to avoid that. They'll take whatever Congress throws at them. The Republicans will never fight hard enough to actually do it. And I understand just how hard the Democrats will fight because I was subject to it. Joe will eventually pardon Hunter and they'll probably get away with all of it. You notice the indictment that he was hit with recently, of all the things that he did, amazingly, none of the things are the things that actually link to Joe Biden, right? The guy, he cannot pay child support, but he can take out $1.6 million in cash in ATM withdrawals over a 4-year period. $865,000 for drugs and women that he's writing. I mean, this is pretty.
That's
pretty
a lot
amazing
of action, bro.
stuff.
That's a lot of action.
We're the ones that they're going after for fraud. It's truly special.
What do you think should happen to him?
Well, listen, I'd like for there to be actual equal justice under the law. I'd like for him to be treated the way I would have been if I had actually done anything wrong. But they're going to make sure that it never gets to that point. We'll never actually probably get to all the details. We'll see all the evidence. We have it. Their whole sale, but there's no evidence. It's like, well, why is Joe Biden receiving 6 figures from, the entity that's linked to you taking money from communist China, that the banks have warned that we don't understand why he's getting this money because there doesn't actually seem to be any business transacting, right? Meanwhile, we're getting sued in New York for fraud because the attorney general, who's an overzealous, Democrat partisan, is like, Deutsche Bank, who's been on the stand, was somehow taken advantage of. They're like, no, we love doing business with Trump. They were top 10, business with us. We used their projects to get other business. We not only did we want to keep doing the business we were doing with them, but we wanted to do more. But no. They're on stand doing this and saying this, but it doesn't matter. They were somehow defrauded and they don't even know it. We live in crazy times, but we have to do something about it because these are the scary things that you wake up from one day and there's no coming back. I mean, this is no longer just, being radical left. I mean, we're living in sort of Marxist communist times. And a lot of people don't quite realize it yet.
Your mom was worried about socialism in this country, wasn't she?
Oh man, 100%. Listen, I didn't know it, but I think a big part of when she was sending me there every summer was hey, I understand just how blessed we are to have what we have here in America. And I don't mean, being born as a Trump. I mean, freedom. My first real memory of like fear, one of the first times I was going over that, I was 5, 6 years old. Grandfather was picking me up at the airport and, it was sort of the early 80s, right? I'm wearing like a jean jacket and I had the stars and stripes on it, the flag. I guess it was 80s cool, blonde bowl cut. I probably thought I was a badass, but it was, I literally got pulled out of line, by a soldier with an AK-47. It was like, are you here to spread the propaganda? I didn't know what propaganda was. I was like 6, but it was like, oh my God, like you can't even wear a jean jacket here without being questioned. Is there an ulterior motive? But I was 6. Like, I didn't even get the benefit of the doubt where, like, it's just an American kid. Like, they don't even know. They were concerned that, even someone like that could possibly be doing something like that. And again, you're certainly seeing the foundation of that here right now. And so, I don't think it was intentional necessarily, but that was definitely sort of the start of my political leanings, right? I'm supposed to be, I went to an Ivy League school. I lived in New York. Hell, my first political fundraiser was for Andrew Cuomo.
Wow.
Because, if you're a real estate guy, you need, you're the attorney general of the state signs off on every one of your offering plans, right? That's how you build a building, so that's how the game's played. So I get it. But I wasn't, and I think a big part of it was really because of that upbringing.
Last couple of questions, because I know you're limited here. Would you recommend my kids go to an Ivy League school?
Okay, this is a great question, and it's an important one because there was a time that I actually thought that mattered. You know, the Wharton Diploma and stuff like that. Now, honestly, when you see what's going on these campuses, when you see the acceptance rates, and you sort of, you put on the very obvious DEI filter, of what's going on there, you realize, like, dude, I would so much rather have a kid that broke his ass at a state school and worked really hard and gets it than someone that, who honestly may even have, and in this case, I don't think they do probably anymore, but may even have a couple higher IQ points. I think there's a drama factor now with the Ivy League and some of those top universities. They're so coddled. They think they're so special that if there is a difference, and there probably isn't anymore. Again, I think so much of that's probably been weeded out. I don't think it's worth the added headache.
What about
of the drama?
The
Ivy League kids today, they feel like they're the people that would go and complain to HR on day one about some sort of grievance that no one else in the world would even imagine is a grievance. So right now, there was a time I would have said 100%. The credentials, the diploma. Whether, I don't know that you ever learned all that much more, but I think it was sort of it was a great way to get in a door, right? It sort of gave you instant credibility in a certain way. And I think that's largely diminished, if not entirely gone.
Would you recommend college at all today?
Honestly, that's even a better question. The answer is, for a lot of people, probably not.
Yeah.
When you see, so many of these kids, you come out of college with $400,000 in debt, I guess, hey, I'll vote Democrat, so they'll pay it off and I don't really have to do it. So I'm going to let a guy that's a plumber who's making good money without the debt, took fiscal responsibility. I guess, he can subsidize my underwater basket weaving degree, or, gender studies or women's studies or whatever studies. I don't know what those things mean. I don't know what they get you. I don't think they get you anything. I don't think there's not a rational return on investment there. What are you?
Yeah.
What job do you get with a gender studies degree that you're going to pay, that you're going to make even, barely minimum wage? Like, it's wonderful if you want to study this stuff, but you're going to take on debt to study something where there's no rational return. But we've done that. And, government has created the incentives. There's always going to be the backstop, and nothing's really kept, college tuition in check. They keep raising it and raising it and raising it. And it's just sort of been a diminished value proposition. I published a book, actually. So much of what we say on the conservative side of things, has gotten censored lately. I literally started a publishing company, and I published a book by Charlie Kirk, about that, called The College Scam. And it talks about just that, sort of the continuing diminishing return of a tuition, that never seems to ever go down, that always seems to keep going up, because there's this infallible backstop of the government coming in, and we'll just take care of that while we're creating the highest level of educated idiots, in the history of the world, that are essentially incompetent.
Totally.
Getting out of college, even though they have their doctoral thesis, again, in gender studies. They're doctors, but they add no actual value, and certainly wouldn't be able to support themselves or others.
2024 election, what happens? Give me your. Who's he running against?
Listen, I think if you get rid of sort of what I'll call the margin of fraud and whatever gamesmanship, the lawfare, the other stuff that the Democrats are doing, there's not a rational person in America who doesn't say, like, hey man, we were so much better off under Trump, whether that's with interest rates, whether that's with what's going on, in world wars. I mean, I'm not just talking, obviously Ukraine, that wasn't going to happen under Trump, because, peace through strength is a real thing. It's the nature of the wild. It's the predation. Predators strike when they see weakness. And, Joe Biden, no one, does anyone really believe Joe Biden's competent? I mean, he can't get through a sentence. I mean, he's the leader of the free world. This guy's got the nuclear, football. But, on a daily basis, he's falling up a flight of stairs, and he's, can't find his way off a stage, and he can't remember, the people
sad,
he's introducing. Like,
yeah,
it's all a joke. And then, again, I see it at the pump and I see it in the grocery store. And again, I also understand, I'm the son of a billionaire from Manhattan. Like I get it. Like, if gas was $10, it's probably not going to change my habits. But if I'm pissed off, like if I notice it and take my kids to, grab a meal, I'm like, what the hell? Like if it's bothering me, it's crushing Americans.
Yes.
If I buy a truck, fine. I'm paying a lot more than I ever would have because of the inflation of the components and the supply chain issues created. But imagine, like for me, I can buy that with cash. Imagine you're adding sort of the compound inflation of now having to finance that truck at 7% and what that does. Like, it's going to destroy people.
It is already.
When people's 5-year arm, their 7-year arm comes due. Like it happened to me. I had to maintained a place, for my ex, and I had to do that. So I wasn't really paying attention. Like, hey, interest rate came due, reset, and it was like, oh my God, like my monthly payment went up $4,000. It's a larger home than the average home in America, but it's also, it wasn't an insane mortgage. It's just that the rates went up so much more. It's like, holy crap, like $4,000 a month. Like, so fine, maybe that's more than the average, American household. But if that resets and it's $1,000 or $1,500 for that person, that's a game changer, Grant. That's going to crush them. And so I think it only gets worse before it gets better. So I think people are waking up to it. They're not listening to sort of the soundbite on CNN, like Bidenomics is working great for everyone. Like, no, dude, like you're not going to lie to people when they see it every day in every aspect of their lives. And so, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of gamesmanship. You see it going on with, what's happening in DC and in the Georgia cases and the lawfare. But again, I think it's gotten so extreme. The pendulum overcorrected so badly that Americans get it.
Yeah.
And they're not going to fall for it anymore.
Do you think Biden even runs?
Listen, I think he's going to try to stay in it as long as possible because he's got to be there to try to pardon his son. So maybe that's that's perhaps the only thing that keeps him in it. He's not in it, right? He's clearly not there mentally, but he's not getting the hints from the deep state and the Democrats who are telling it's time to move on. Like, don't worry. You see what's going on. Even they're like, this is kind of ugly. The problem that they're faced is that, well, if they kick him out now, they end up with Kamala Harris, who could actually arguably be worse, which is, sort of hard to believe, but, you listen to when she speaks and it's like the word salad, it's so unrelatable, so unlikable, that they're in a real conundrum. And I think they have a problem. I think they recognize that.
Money from communist China that the banks have about them replacing him with somebody else like Michelle Obama or Newsom or.
Listen, I think there's so many variables on the table. I got to deal with it as they come. Do I think they're going to play games? Sure. I will say, hey, do I think if the election were today and it was real and fair, you see all the stuff coming out now in these states. It's like, well, yeah, we found a lot of voter fraud, but it doesn't matter now because it's too late. It's like, wait a second. Like, I remember a couple, if you said that, 2 years ago and you were right about it, just like every conspiracy, like, the difference between a conspiracy theory and the truth is about 6 months, right? When they all turned out to be true. Your average conspiracy theorist uncle is betting far more, has a much, more higher correct average than everyone in the mainstream media that told you every conspiracy that turns out to be true wasn't, right? Wuhan lab, like of course it came from the lab. Like wait, no, Grant, it came from 2 feet outside of the lab that studies the exact virus in question, funded, but like of course it didn't. Like these were always obvious. They were always the most plausible answers, but you were cut out. You were thrown off social media. You were cut out from polite society. If you were a doctor and you questioned, the gospel according to Fauci, you lost your medical license or you lost your medical grants. And so even if you were right, like Scott Atlas was, it didn't matter because like you were erased. You were canceled. People get that, but hey, there's no level that the Democrats won't go to. There's no amount that they won't try. So I'm sure there'll be stuff they'll be throwing at us, but we're going to keep fighting.
How do we help, man? How do we help make sure your dad gets reelected? If people are for that,
people just have to like look at it. Just use common sense. Mm-hmm. Use common sense. Like, don't listen to the narrative. Understand exactly what's going on. See what's exactly been. Listen to everything that they told you for Russia, Russia, Russia. I mean, that was the gospel. That was there was not the info. They clearly because Trump needed the money. I don't like. like logic and reason didn't matter. They ran with it for 4 years. There's people still pretending it's real.
Yeah, now that's been dispelled completely. There is no Russia.
You know, I think you have to use common sense. You know, think about your children, your future. Watch the way, you know, the new narrative, right? Trump's going to be a dictator. It's like, I don't know, like the Democrat Party is the dictator. The FBI is locking up, you know, innocents. They're calling domestic. They're calling, you know, Catholics, practicing Catholics, domestic terrorists.
Yeah.
Not because they've done anything in domestic terrorists. You know, concerned mothers who voiced an opinion at a PTA meeting, Grant, are domestic terrorists. You know who's not a domestic terrorist? Like people who are actually committing violent crime around the country. That's why you can't say that because, you know, maybe they checked off one. You know, they're trans and therefore you can't see their manifesto, even if it's hate-filled, and even, you know, well, no, we got to protect that person at all costs, even if it means, you know, throwing all rhyme and reason out the window. And so I think people, you know, if they just don't buy into the BS, look to facts and reason, it sort of becomes obvious. And I think the big thing is people have to get involved, right? They have to become unafraid to actually have this discourse. You don't have to, you know, be aggressive about it like I am, but you have to be unafraid enough to have that conversation because, you know, they're counting on that apathy. The fear of being canceled because you make sense. Well, I can't do that. That's, you know, there is a consequence to being conservative, right? They've shown that very clearly, but we can't let it shut everything down to where people are so afraid that they don't talk about the logic of what's going on. We've seen that at other times in history. They're trying to do it now. They've done it very effectively, and it didn't work out well at all. You know, we got to speak up against that. And, you know, if you get everyone sort of on that same thing, if everyone's unafraid, they can take out one guy who goes out and is willing to say these things by himself while everyone sort of sheepishly stands behind him. But if everyone goes out there and you know, with rhyme and reason, they're not going to cancel half the country.
Mm-hmm. Man, I appreciate you being on here. Love to have you back. I got another dozen things I'd love to talk to you about. And,
we'll make that happen in the not too distant future for sure, man.
And love to have you and Kimberly down for dinner sometime. You guys, Donald Trump Jr., thank you so much, Donald, for being here.
Thanks a lot, Grant. Have a good one, guys.